Hey, everybody. I want to welcome you to the virtual SAS Global Forum 2020. We're going to talk about a beginner's guide to using arrays and do loops today. My name is Jennifer Waller. I work at Augusta University in the Division of Biostatistics and Data Science. I'm a professor there and have been there since 1997. So let's get started on using arrays and do loops. And so we're going to kind of talk about what an array and a do loop are and give you some examples to go from there and how to set one up. So what is an array? An array is just a set of variables of the same type, specifically the same type, all numeric or all character, that you want to perform the same operation on. So maybe you want to set everything from missing to zero or zero to missing, but you want to perform that same operation on them. You reference that array with an array name, and that array name is used to correspond to a set of variables, and those variables are called elements of the array. And how do we actually access those elements of the array? We do that using a do loop. And so what we can do, the do loop references back to the array. You can change values on a set of variables. You can create new variables from an existing set. You can change the data structure. You can do all kinds of stuff with do loops, not just referencing an array, other things, and we'll hit those at the very end. But a do loop is just you step through the items in the array, and that's what it's used to do. So for today, we're going to be looking at a set of data on the Center for Epidemiologic Depression scale, or the CESD scale. It is a 20-item questionnaire, and it's used to assess depressive symptomatology. It is scored on a scale of 0 to 3, and the total score on the CESD is determined by summing up the 20 items. One thing to note, though, so this is a depression scale, and some of the questions are written in the positive form. So items 4, 8, 12, and 16 are written positively. So I feel happy rather than I feel sad. And so those items need to be reversed before we create that total score. And so here's just an example of the data. I have data out on GitHub if you want to follow along. This used to be a hands-on workshop. And if you wanted to go onto GitHub and get that, you have CES data there that you can play with. But it's just, you'll notice there are 20 items, values 0 to 3. Sometimes people don't answer an item, so that item is missing. But the idea is that these items, item 4, 8, 12, and 16 need to be reversed. So how do we do that? Well, with just 4 items, it's not that bad, right? You can just take each item, subtract it from 3, and there you go. There is how we would, create those reversals. And so, again, we're performing that same operation on each of these 4 variables. And it's not really a problem when you have just a small number of variables. But what if you had 100 variables? What if you had to do this on 100 variables? That would be painful to copy and paste code over and over and over and over again. Whereas with an array and do loop, you can do it in just a few lines of code. And so you can make your programs more efficient, but you can also reduce the opportunity to create a typo. And so there are several different types of arrays and several different types of do loops. We're going to focus today on indexed arrays and iterative do loops. And we're going to focus on a non-indexed array and what's called a do-over loop. So let's just get into the syntax of an array. An array is referenced in a data step, not anywhere else, just in a data step. using the keyword array. We then give it some array name. I like to use an array name that starts with the letter A, and that just allows me to remember when I'm coding, hey, this is an array. Just like with a format, I like to start my formats with the letter F. So this is a format. It just keeps things straight in my brain. You can do whatever you want, but this array name is just a valid SAS name. It's not a variable name in the data set. With an indexed array, you indicate the number of elements in curly brackets in the array. So this N here is just the number of elements in the array, or the number of variables in the array. If your array has character variables in them, you designate the array as character with this $sign here after the index number. If you're creating new variables and you want all the variables in the array to have a particular length, you'd use the length option here. Again, that's optional. And then you list out your array elements, and that's just the list of variables, each separated by a space that you can do. If you have numbered variables with a number on the end, that's sequential. You can use list format in the array statement as well. But it's just important to know that those are just variables. They are all of the same type. Okay, that's the key. If you can't mix character and numeric variables in an array. You can have different arrays with all numeric variables and then another array with character, but they have to all be the same type of variable in the specific array. So here is an example, and this is the example where we're going to reverse these 4 items, 4, 8, 12, and 16. So again, I've got my data set here. I'm naming my array. I start with my keyword array. I name my array A reverse. It has 4 elements, CESD4, CESD8, CESD12, and CESD16. Okay, I indicate that there are 4 elements by entering that 4 in the curly bracket. The $sign is not needed because these are all numeric variables. The length is not needed because I'm not really defining new variables, and I've never really actually used the length option anyways. I just let the variable values take on whatever type of variable and give it that default number of bits or bytes or whatever. But then the list of array elements is, again, just CESD4, 8, CESD12, and 16. So nothing too earth-shattering there. Okay, you can extend this beyond line, again, beyond one line. Again, we just start with the array statement and we end with that semicolon. As you know, in SAS, any statement begins with some keyword and ends with a semicolon. Same thing with an array statement. Now, a do loop, the do loop that we want to use is called an index do loops. Do loops are used to specify a set of statements or operations that you want to perform as a unit during each iteration of the loop. So you can perform multiple operations within a loop. You can reference multiple arrays within a do loop. Every do loop does have, it starts with the keyword do and has a corresponding end statement. If you forget the end statement, SAS is going to tell you that and stuff will not run. So check your log. Do loops are used only to perform several operations within an observation. So it's all done within that observation in the data step. We use our procedures to perform operations across our observations. We do data step stuff to perform operations within an observation. So again, remember that's done just within that observation. There are 4 types of do loops. We're going to focus on 2 of them today. There's the iterative do loop or indexed do loop, and I use that with an indexed array. And that starts with the keyword do. You give it an index variable and an equal sign, and there's a little more to that we'll get to in just a second. There is the do-over loop, which we're going to hit today, and that performs all operations in the loop over all the elements in the corresponding array. There's a do until, where you perform all the operations until a condition is satisfied, or the do while, where you perform the operations while a condition is satisfied. The iterative do loop, which is what we're going to use with the indexed array, executes the statements between the do and the end repetitively based on the value of the index variable. So our syntax is we start with that keyword do. We use some index variable name. I typically use I, J, K, L, M, but you could use anything. You could use the word Freddie if you wanted to use the word Freddie. It doesn't matter. Just give it some index variable name. Just be aware that you're going to be referencing that index variable within the do loop as part of, and when you're referencing the array. You give it a start value. You use the keyword to. You give it a stop value. And you can increment by something other than 1. The default is to increment by 1. So if you needed to go over on just the even numbers in the array, you can do that by starting at 2 and ending at 20 and increment by 2. Or if you need to do the odds, start at 1, go to 20, increment by, I guess, well, or by 19 and increment by 2, and that'll hit just the odd numbers. So you can do that as well. Array is referenced in an iterative do loop or index do loop by referencing the array name. So you use the array name as you would a variable name. And then you specifically tell it what value of the array or what variable in the array using the index variable that you want to perform that operation on. So here you have your syntax is the array name and then that index variable that you defined in the do statement. So let's just see some code and see how I would do that. So the above do loop will step through the loop 4 times. So I've got my array that I indicated before, array A reverse. It's got 4 items, CESD 4, 8, 12, and 16. I start my do loop. I'm going to start my index. I'm going to call it I because I don't like to type. And so anytime I can have less typing, I take it. I start with I equals 1, and I'm going to 4. And notice my 4 matches the number of elements in my array. I reference my array name, A reverse, here, and then indicate what item in the array I want to reference using that index variable I. So the I in the square brackets matches the I in the do statement, that index variable name. That is then equal to 3 minus the same item in the array, A reverse square bracket I. And then to make sure that I've ended my do loop, end it with the end statement followed by a semicolon. And so we're going to go through what each iteration looks like in this as we step through this array. So on the first iteration of the do loop, the index variable value is 1. So we're going to take the first item in A reverse, which is the array A reverse, item 1. We're going to take 3 minus A reverse item 1. Now A reverse item 1 corresponds to CESD 4, and SAS interprets this code as CESD 4 equals 3 minus CESD 4. It increases the index variable by 1, increases I by 1, and goes back to the beginning of the do statement because I have hit the end of the code before the end statements. So I'm now in the second iteration of the do loop, the second iteration. My index variable value is now equal to 2. So now I'm looking at A reverse item 2 equals 3 minus A reverse item 2. A reverse item 2 corresponds to CESD 8. And so SAS interprets that code as CESD 8 minus equals to 3 minus CESD 8. We increase I by 1 again, and we go back. And we keep increasing, and we keep stepping through the loop until I is greater than the stop value of the do loop. So it would hit item 4, increase I, go back to the start of the do loop. I is now 5, and it would say, well, 5 isn't a value, and it would exit the do loop. Okay, so that is an indexed array and an indexed do loop. We're now going to cover non-indexed arrays and non-indexed do loops. These are very similar, but the only thing is I don't have that n. I don't have the number of items in my array. Syntax is essentially the same. You just don't have to tell SAS how many items are in the array. SAS will figure it out. And so here's an example of code. And so the only thing I've left off is that index, that curly bracket for curly bracket. Still have the same array name. My $sign isn't needed because all variables are numeric. And then I still have the same list of variables. So nothing is really changing. I then use a do-over loop. It's one of the more useful do loops that I've discovered when I use an array and I don't know how many variables are in that array. Using a do loop with using the do over loop with that array just causes SAS to do everything within that do loop over every variable in the array. You can use multiple arrays within the do loop. You do have to be aware that each array must have the same number of elements if you're referencing multiple arrays, and that if you're assigning values from one array to another, that your variables correspond in terms of the order that they are in each array. And here's an example. So again, you're going to specify the array name, you're going to list out your elements, you're going to do over your array name, and then you're going to perform the operations on the array name. So this is the syntax. So again, you list out your elements. You start with do over, give it that array name, and you don't have to have an index, which for me is great because I sometimes miss the square brackets and then I'm wondering where the heck stuff is doing. But here is what I wanted to show you, that things need to be lined up. Here, the issue is, okay, if I wanted to create new variables and reverse, because I want to maintain my original scale. So now I'm creating RCESD4, RCESD12, RCESD16, and RCESD8. But you'll notice these are in different orders than the array A old. Okay, what this is going to do is it's going to correctly assign the value, the reversed value for CESD4, but it's going to incorrectly assign the reversed value of CESD8 to CESD12, to RCESD12, and the incorrect value of reversed CESD12 to RCESD16, and the incorrect value of CESD16 reversed to RCESD8. So things are not in the correct order. So you have to make sure that your variables are listed in the same order if you're assigning the values of variables in the same array. So here we have the correct order. CSD4, reverse CSD4 is always first, 8 is always second, 12 is always third, and 16 is always fourth. Okay, so that is basically the gist of arrays and do loops. I have found arrays and do loops to be very, very helpful. I use them in just about every program I create because I typically have multiple variables that I need to change a value or do some type of an operation on. They do have many uses. You can create new variables, perform the same operation, rename variables. You can change the data structure from a short, wide data set to a long, skinny data set, and I would reference my paper for information on how to do that. I've used arrays to simulate or create randomization schemes. One thing to note, you can always use an indexed array and iterative do loop. You may not always be able to get away with non-indexed and do-over loops. While they're less typing, sometimes they're just not feasible in terms of what you're doing. So I want to thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions at all regarding arrays and do loops, or if I wasn't clear on something, please feel free to contact me. You can contact me at jwaller@augusta.edu. And I look forward to hearing from you, and have a wonderful day.